Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the term self-care, as in, what exactly is it? I haven't really pondered what it meant, despite the fact that I tend to use it a lot, and I also hear the term being thrown around a lot, especially in the lifestyle/productivity YouTube niche. It seems fairly simple, right? I mean, self-care should mean taking care of yourself. But in a more specific way, what exactly does taking care of yourself look like? I feel that the term self-care has had its meaning consistently broadened over the last few years, and especially ever since it entered the mainstream vocabulary. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm absolutely certain that the majority of people, myself included, have this stereotypical image that comes to mind every time they think of the term. Face masks, spa days, sipping hot tea while reading a book or watching Netflix, etc. Fair enough, self-care can be some of these things. But recently, I've been thinking more about the untouched and somewhat avoided parts of self-care. In the past few years, I found out two things. The first is that not everything is self-care. Not everything that I toss under the self-care umbrella is actually self-care. It's tempting to label any little thing that gives us a mild sense of comfort as self-care. While it largely depends on the context, there are definitely a few things that I would say are not self-care. Downing an entire pint of ice cream before going to bed is probably not self-care. Being lazy and binging TV on the couch or in bed is not self-care. I used to label certain things as such because it gave me an excuse to indulge in them with no guilt. In reality, though, I was pretty much just lying to myself. I wasn't actually taking care of myself in any meaningful way. I was just indulging myself. And this is the sinister part about so-called self-care. Sometimes something that we think of as self-care is actually just self-indulgence. Or worse, self-sabotage. The second thing I learned is that self-care can be hard. A lot of things that constitute true self-care are actually kind of hard to do. The truth is that just because something is genuinely good for us doesn't mean that we'll automatically be inclined to do it. Whether that's exercise or eating right or getting off of YouTube. Despite the fact that we know that they're good for us, they can be hard to do because they require effort. Self-care requires effort, and that's not something a lot of us associate it with. Of course, it would be weird if I just made an entire video about what self-care is not, so I put together a non-exhaustive list of things that self-care can be. There's a saying that goes, look good to feel good. And I think that's very true to a certain extent. A quick shower and a clean outfit go a long way to making yourself feel better. Sometimes it's better to just recharge at home than to constantly try and be out and about, chasing every single social event. Obviously, it's important to socialize, but if you're doing it to the detriment of your well-being, then maybe it's better to just stay in for a bit. This is the exact opposite of the last one because I think it's really important to have balance, especially for an introvert like myself who tends to just keep to himself 90% of the time. It's so easy to just stay inside and stay isolated, but the truth of the matter is that humans are social beings and we were meant to thrive in community and in relationships and friendships. So Yeah, it's important to get out there once in a while, whether that's for a walk or hitting up a friend or even just going for coffee or for food by yourself. Exercise feels amazing, or at least the feeling after it feels amazing. I was sick for a bit a few weeks ago, and honestly, I was kind of sad that I couldn't go to the gym for that week. It's ironic because a lot of times I'm very hesitant and reluctant to go to the gym, and sometimes I really just want to skip. But for that short bit where I was deprived of the opportunity, I was actually sad that I couldn't go. One of the best things I've learned over the past year is that it's actually good to force yourself to exercise. Whenever I forced myself to go when I wasn't feeling it, all the reluctance and hesitation disappeared as soon as I set foot in the gym. It's as if all that hesitation and reluctance was just preemptive and it didn't actually mean anything because they disappeared almost instantly. So, in general, it feels really good to overcome your reluctance, especially when it comes to something that you know is good for you. On the flip side, I also think it's important to know when and when not to push yourself. And that's why I included the second bit about not exercising. Like I just said, I had to take 2 weeks off from the gym because I was sick. And self-care in that instance would not have been to just go against my physical state and force myself to work out. I would have just made myself feel worse. So the gist of it would be to remember to exercise, especially when you don't feel like it, but to also recognize your limits. This one is, again, super important to me because I'm a huge introvert. I hit up a friend a few months ago to shoot some B-roll, and honestly, it ended up being so worth it. I got way more out of it than just some B-roll. We ended up chatting, exchanging recent life experiences and life lessons, and really overall just building each other up as friends. And it makes me super grateful to have people like that in my life. This one is especially personal, so I don't expect everyone to relate, but for me, it has been critical to read my Bible on a regular basis. To other believers, that might sound fairly obvious, but honestly, it took me a minute to realize. And the reason why I don't do it as often as I should is because it's kind of hard to do, to be honest. I know. I guess I'm a fake. The truth is that the Bible is actually kind of difficult to read. And I've realized that part of it is because it's not so straightforward, right? The meaning is layered in the text, and it's a lot more spiritual than it is literal. I feel like reading self-help and philosophy books is somehow easier because the delivery of the message is far more straightforward. And as a result, I can go through entire books much quicker than I can get through chapters of the Bible. As with everything on this list though, it is so worth it, and I always find myself gaining something, even if it's small, from forcing myself to go through with it. It can also be really tempting to forgo the Bible with Bible-related literature. I'm not roasting Christian authors or anything. Matter of fact, I have several books from some of my favorite authors. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like getting the truth from the source. I never really thought to put this on the list until someone mentioned it to me, and it made me realize that it's actually important. I don't know about you, but I very easily tend to skip meals when I'm super busy or I'm frustrated or I'm not feeling well. And after thinking about it for a bit, I realized the importance of actually sitting down to eat a meal instead of just stuffing myself with snacks throughout the day. This one is pretty simple. A clean environment means a clean headspace. And taking the time to rearrange and put things away neatly can actually be super therapeutic. You've probably heard this a bunch of times, but sleep helps in a lot of ways, which I'm not going to get into right now. But in general, getting a good night's sleep and sleeping well is so important for our overall health and well-being. And I'm not just talking about getting in the right amount of sleep. I'm also talking about your bedtime and your wake-up time. You should wake up at a time that makes you feel good about yourself. Or in other words, you should respect yourself enough to wake up at a reasonable hour. I use the word reasonable and not early because I think that there's a clear distinction that needs to be made. Obviously, not everyone is meant to wake up at 4 a.m., get on the grind and start hustling and working on your business and getting ahead of everyone else in life. Early bird gets the worm. All that hustle culture hyperbole. Obviously, if that's what makes you feel good, by all means. But for a lot of us, that just means waking up at a time where you don't feel like crap. For me personally, my ideal wake time is around 9 a.m. I know, not exactly impressive. It's neither early nor is it late, and that's what works for me. Just wake up at a time that makes sense for you, a time that gives you some sense of self-respect. If that time for you is noon for some reason, then so be it. So in short, make sure to sleep properly, sleep enough, and then go to bed at a time that makes sense so that you can wake up at a time that you feel good. Whether you do this for a short break, like a day, several days, a week, a month, or you just do it before bed, I think breaking from social media is so important. I know that you probably already know this, so it's not exactly some major revelation, but it's so important to just unplug and be present in your own life instead of peering into whatever is going on somewhere else. Make sure that you set aside time to create. What I mean by this is that instead of consuming constantly and mindlessly, you should take some time to do something fulfilling. Think of it like this. Watching movies, watching TV, watching YouTube, scrolling through social media, or even reading books, those are all forms of consumption. Creating would be like going out for a walk, or making something, or spending some time with friends. Basically, do stuff that requires output on your end. For me, that involves making YouTube videos. That's actually part of why I'm making this. And one of the coolest things I've realized over the past few years is that doing something that isn't just watching other people do stuff is so fulfilling. And ironically, despite the fact that it requires energy and effort on my part, it actually ends up recharging me. I have an entire video on this topic, so if you want to go check that out, I'll leave a link. But the gist of it is that you should always take some time to create for yourself instead of just consuming other people's creations. I want to close by saying that a lot of the advice I mentioned here is predicated on discernment. Whether or not something counts as taking care of yourself is going to be based on context, except for maybe doing crack. Like, I can't see any scenario in which that would ever count as self-care. For a lot of things, though, the judgment is up to you. Basically, self-care is so much more than just sit back and relax. It's taking time to actively do what's beneficial for your long-term well-being. The whole point of the concept comes from the fact that life can be so busy sometimes that we forget to give ourselves basic care. The idea is to take a step back from the grind and tend to our well-being before moving on. So with the upcoming new year in mind, I hope that we all remember to take good care of ourselves and to do what's best for our well-being, not just for our own sake, but also for the sake of taking care of the people around us and taking care of the people that we care about. With that being said, Happy New Year, and thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourself.